Good evening and welcome to the October 15th, 2025 Planning Board Educational Session. My name is Bruce Barber. I'm the town's environmental planning consultant.
My name is John Andrews. I serve as engineer to the Planning Board.
So welcome everybody, and we received your comments regarding what you would like to talk about and discover tonight, so we think we have a pretty interesting program for you. Basically what's going to happen this evening is for the first half hour, I'm going to be talking about some of the foundational elements of land use and how it relates to natural resources and specifically soils. John is then going to spend the next hour or so going into the mysterious process of Putnam County Department of Health reviews and approvals and what happens after a project might leave this board and go to a referral for that agency. The last half hour, I'm going to wrap up, and I'm going to walk you through from beginning to end an application, starting with Zoom meetings and ending up with certificate of occupancies or compliance. And if we have time, we will talk a little bit about some of the newer technologies relative to land use planning and septic systems, and also some of the more practical applications. So if you have questions, just fire away. We should have a halftime somewhere in the neighborhood of the middle of John's presentation, unless you would prefer 5 minutes after my presentation and John. Which would you prefer? So 5 minutes or a halftime somewhere in the middle? What do you think? 5 minutes after each one? 5 minutes now? Sounds fun to me. All right. So I'm going to start off basically by asking you folks on the planning board, what is it that you do? This is not a rhetorical question. Exactly what is it that you do? Anybody? I don't want to do the Bueller thing here now. Anybody? What is it you do as planning board members? What is the planning board?
We make sure that the project follows the codes of the town.
Make sure the project follows the codes of the town. Okay, so the codes of the town are imbued really in a lot of land use decisions. Land use having to do with how a particular property is used, right? Whether it's going to be a house that's built on it or a commercial building or preserved as conservation land. It has to do, you folks are land use decision makers, right? That's what you do. So when we think about the land, normally when we see an application, we immediately start looking at buildings. What's going on the site? As Kathy said, does it meet the code requirements? Does it meet zoning, et cetera? But as developer looks at a property, initially what they do is they look at three different things. Is what they want to build physically possible? Is what they want to build legally possible, such as zoning and things like that? And for their purposes, is it financially feasible? Meaning, will it maximize the return on their investment? We're going to talk about, or I'm going to talk about, the physically possible piece of it because that's what we see when we have an application before us. So what constitutes a physical possibility on the site? Well, when you think about it, it has everything to do with soils. The soils are going to dictate what kind of vegetation is going to be growing on the property that the builder may be needing to clear and cut. Trees, brush, other vegetation, right? Soils are going to depend upon what's growing there, or what's growing there, depends on the soils. Second thing is the soils are going to dictate to a great part where wetlands are located. There's code requirements that you can and can't build in certain wetland areas, and permits are required, et cetera, for that. You also deal with that. Soils have to do with erosion and sediment control. Certain soils are highly erodible, much more so than other soils, and you also deal with steep slopes, which are dictated by soils as well. So all of these things, erosion and sediment control permits that you see all the time, limits of disturbing and clearing of the site to make room for the improvements, the house, the driveway, the septic system, has to do with soils on the site. Steep slopes, erosion control, stormwater management has to do with what's on the site. So we're going to talk about soils for a little bit, okay, and how that impacts some of the work that you do. So before we go anywhere, I have a laboratory assignment for you, and we're going to start with Hugo and then Jackie. We're going to go across, and I want you just to come up here very briefly, and if you feel like it, and I hope you do, I want you to take a quick feel of what's in each one of these cups, and we're going to talk about it. Hi, Simon. So come on up. You don't need the mic.
This is just a touchy-feely.
So do that one first. One, two, three. So from right to left. Oh, gee whiz, we have a student here now. Yeah. Dirt.
Sand.
All right. There's always
Well,
one in
let me tell you what a college professor told me once. Dirt is what you sweep into a pile
That's right.
off the floor.
Thank you, John.
Other than that, it is classified as soil. So, you need to understand that the term is
So-
soil.
So show off, we'll be calling on you in just a little bit, okay?
That's definitely sand.
Yeah.
How's that sand?
Come on up.
As the guy infamously said to us, they're just weeds.
True. All right, right to left.
Am I supposed to say something on that?
You can if you wish.
Clay. Clay-ish, soil.
Clay, ooh, okay,
Dense-ish,
ish, Okay.
soil.
okay, ish,
Lighter sandish soil.
okay. Who else is next? Kathy.
Are we cheating? Because I heard both of them.
Well,
No,
you may or
need
may
to-
not
you-
agree.
You all need to
Oh,
kind of,
feel it.
yep.
Now that clay is,
Definitely clay. My
that-
son used to play with clay.
yeah, well, that's from Pennsylvania Pocono area.
It really is like this?
I got that from the Poconos, yeah.
Wow.
And the color is due to the presence of a large percentage of iron.
Yeah, hematite.
Oh, really?
Yes, and that's common in that area.
And this is?
Yorktown
Yorktown soil
and Yorktown.
and sand.
Okay. Who else wants to just come up here and do this? Come on, man.
Play-Doh?
He's got kids.
He's got a lot of kids. Ed?
Sand.
There, perfect. Thank you very much. Thanks for it. Who else is that? Simon, you want to come up? Sure, you can have a piece. It's a snack. Right to left.
Just don't say
That I know.
dirt, son.
Well, I know I'm not gonna say dirt, it's soil.
Thank
This
you,
is
John.
sand over here, but I don't know that one.
Okay.
I'm not gonna say that one.
All right. Oh, it will. Oh, it will. Yeah, I got it. Actually, yesterday I had to keep it moist so you could use. Anybody else want to come up? Going once? All right. For those of you advanced students, clay, soil, and sand. Pure clay, pure sand, and soil. So,
Just going
go
to
ahead, John.
interrupt a minute. If you take what's in your hand and you roll it
Oh, an advanced
between
student.
if it stays together and elongates, it means it's predominantly a clay. If you were to do that and if it felt like that, but if you were to do that and it broke apart, it's predominantly a silt. And if you were sand, there's a degree of grit. So those of us that do this for a living, people always laugh, why are you rolling it in your hand? You're rolling it in your hand to mentally classify it. Just a trick of the trade. I'm sure he does it differently, but that's the way dumb septic engineers do it.
Well, you're creating ribbons and you're using your thumb to see how, yeah, so there's definitely ways to do it. But what I want you to look at, your first handout, everybody got one of these, guys? Soil texture? Oh, if you don't have one, here you go. So what you were doing is actually feeling these particular samples and assessing mentally the texture. Whether you're aware of it or not, that's exactly what you were doing, and what it felt like is the texture. And there are three basic textures, or what we'll call particle sizes, in soils. The largest particle sizes are sand, intermediate are called silt, and the smallest particle size are clay. And when we have soils in the environment, it's relatively rare that we have a pure sand or a pure clay or a pure silt. There's usually a mixture of all those soils, and that mixture has profound impacts on your land use planning and what John's going to talk about next. So basically, what I'm going to do is, well, before we do this, I want you to go to the next page, and this is not heavy-duty stuff, but this is the soil triangle. This is the most, you're in your first class of soil science class, this is what they're going to show you. And basically, how do we determine the percentage of each component, sand, silt, and clay, in your soil sample you've taken from the field. What we do is we have a graduated cylinder, and we basically put a usually 100-gram sample of our soil, and then the most easy way and least scientific way, but what's commonly used in the field, is we shake it vigorously. And then over time, we watch the particles settle in percentages of that column that we're looking at. What are the particles that settle the fastest on the bottom? Sand, followed by silt, followed by clay. Doesn't make sense intuitively, but the sand are the smallest, lightest particles. They're tiny microscopic particles. You can see these sand particles, and you can't see these clay particles. They're so tiny. So based upon those fractions, then we can go to this triangle, and you can see on the left side percent clay, on the right side percent silt, the right side percent sand. So you can see at the top, very, very top, if we have 100% clay, that whole area is clay. But different percentages, you would run your fingers across and down and come up with silty loam, silt loam, loam, sandy clay loam. So when you see a report that's given to you by a consultant that says, yeah, we found the soil was mostly sandy or sandy clay loam. Well, now you know that's a percentage predominantly of clay and sand with a less amount of silt. All right, so that's all there is to this mystery of people saying to you, yeah, it's clay loam, sandy clay loam, it's silt. It has to do with the percentages of these components. Now, soil also has an organic component we're not going to talk too much about. That is usually decomposed leaves, organisms, what have you. It also has an influence on soil performance, but we're going to leave that for another day. So just for your purposes, we're going to talk about these three soils.
So, if you take an entire town like Kent, is there, does Kent generally fall in a spot here, or is it on any one property you could have all of this?
Okay, so we're going to talk a bit about soil mapping in a second, but on any particular property, you can have several different types of soil. It has a lot to do with the slope of the property. There's typically soils on the top of a hillside, different soils on the medium area of the hillside compared to different soils on the bottom of the hillside, soil called the soil katina. And so a property based upon a lot of factors typically have different soils. Now, there are what are called soil maps. And we're going to talk about that in a second, that are put together by the National Resource Conservation Service. So if you see John or I say, the NRCS soil maps show this. Well, that means that we've looked up this your parcel or some particular parcel, and we found that the parcel boundaries, the property boundaries, have certain soils that are mapped by the National Resource Conservation Service. The important thing to realize, and we're going to get to this as well a little bit more, is that those maps are done not site-specifically. Somebody has not typically walked out onto the site and dug holes to verify the soils on the site. It's done through a lot of aerial photography and other types of remote sensing. So that's why we say we're using these maps as a guide of what may be out on the site, but oftentimes we have to field verify that using a soil scientist or something like that, okay? So what I'm going to do while John is talking is we have 3 samples in there just like these. And I'm going to punch holes through them, and we're going to let them sit, and they're each separately going to drain into containers on that yellow carrier, and then we're going to wait for a little bit and see which ones drain the most and the most quickly, okay? But what I want to talk to you a bit now is how this applies to one specific area that you see all the time, and that's the town code, okay? Now, the town has a freshwater wetlands ordinance, chapter 39A, and in that ordinance, like all ordinances and codes, there are definitions. And our code is no different with respect to how it defines what constitutes a wetland. And the wetland is constituted by 3 components: hydrophytic vegetation, which simply means plants that typically grow in wetlands; hydric soils, which means soils that are typically found in wetlands; and hydrology, meaning surface water or collected water that gives certain symptoms that it's in that area for a while, whether it's stained leaves or staining of the ground or something like that. So when we're doing reviews, John and I have an application, we look at these NRCS soil maps. And a site oftentimes has none of the indicated soils. Because this next page, they already have this page here, it talks about soil types that are poorly drained, very poorly drained, et cetera. You have that? Okay, these are directly from the town code. So when I said that wetlands are comprised of 3 components, our town code indicates that these soil types constitute wetlands. As far as our town code is concerned, if you have any one of these soils on your property, you have a wetland on your property. Now, the town also has a jurisdictional size, smaller than X amount of feet. It's not a jurisdictional, it's still a wetland, but it's not regulated, but that's for another day. So you look at these names, and these are all just names that soil scientists affix to different types of soils, but what you can see at the very top is that the characteristics of these soils regarding wetlands is that they are poorly drained, very poorly drained, alluvial, that means adjacent to streams or in streams, and floodplains. Okay, and you can see Department of Agricultural Soil Conservation Service. So what we're talking about here is soils that don't drain really well are naturally going to be wetland soils typically. They hold water, right? They're not draining well. And isn't that the important part of a wetland is the wet part, okay? So so here's the so what behind this. John was kind enough to put together a project.
Hey, Bruce?
Yeah.
I don't want to pick up my phone and look up alluvial. What does alluvial mean?
Stream beds and surroundings.
Stream bed?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, think of deposited soil.
Yeah.
Basically, the
Right.
water lets it go,
Dumpers.
and it
Oh.
settles out.
Oh, thank you, Paul. That works. Okay, so this is a project, and it's already been through your board. It's under construction right now, called Flintlock Ridge. So initially, this was the application, and they had a wetlands professional go out, and I don't know if you can see, but this was the wetland line that was determined at that time, okay? And as you can see, the wetland buffer, this is the wetland line, was basically down in here, the 100-foot setback. However, what you can see is this LEB. Can everybody, I know you can't see it, it's very difficult. Leicester B is on the list of the soils that are considered hydric soils by the town. It actually extends all the way down, here's the wetland line here, but you can see LEB and extends all the way through here. So now we had a problem, okay? Because basically, I'm gonna report, and John's gonna report to you that, hey, they've done their wetland delineation, all right? But we have soils here that have not apparently been considered to be wetland soils by a professional who went out and looked at this. In other words, are these really wetland soils or not? Remember, these are not site-specific. This might not be correct. So the board correctly asked the applicant to engage the services of a certified soil scientist, and he went out there.
Watch yourself.
Thank you. And in addition to this area, found this area to be wetland soils. This is now a correct wetland map. Here, 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 and here. The wetland buffer extended now to here, okay, if you can see. So that's why when we do these reviews and we're saying to you, well, they have wetland soils as per the NRCS, I'm not professing that I've gone out there and proofing it, because that is the applicant's consultant's responsibility. My responsibility to the town and this board is to verify their work, not to actually delineate it. So that's why we have a soil scientist go out and take a look. What he did is he did soil borings approximately 20 inches deep from the surface, took a look at the soil characteristics based upon these parameters, as well as color of the soil and other situations, and determined that to be wetland soils, okay? So that's what I really wanted to cover, I believe, on my first half hour. What else do we got here?
You got them all.
I think we got the wetland law soils map and what have you. So yeah, does you have any questions right now? Kath?
I mean, that project, I remember it.
Yeah.
I
I just wanted to know that, I noticed that when you drive down, there was a lot of water there. So how did they mitigate that again, just by putting the plants around it?
What the board determined was that the wetland there was basically characteristically lawn surface that had wetland soils underneath it, historic wetland soils. Wasn't really functioning much as a wetland at all. So what the board did is they approved a stormwater management practice that is a wet pond, basically actually creating a larger wetland on the site that will treat stormwater management and function as a wetland. That's a very rare thing to do. Normally, we look at three things with wetlands. Avoidance. Can you do something where you can avoid the impacts altogether? Move the property around, move the house around. Can you minimize? Can you shrink the house down? Can you change the driveway? And then can you mitigate? In other words, how do you offset lost wetland functions by the development? So this was a mitigation plan that actually provided in this very rare instance, a superior wetland to what was there, because basically the wetland was a managed lawn surface. Probably when this was I think like an old ice cream shop or something like that.
Allie's ice cream.
There you go, Allie's Ice Cream. So, yeah, Jackie.
Okay, so at a basic level, the map showed that a certain amount was wetlands based on the soil. The soil maps showed something. When we went out and sampled it, we got the extra dip on that map, correct?
When the original plan was submitted to the board, John and I reviewed it, and I noticed the wetland line, and I noticed that it didn't include the Leicester B soils. And so I wrote my memo indicating that it does not, to you folks, does not appear to be included in the map, and recommended that you consider soil scientists to go out and do the work to determine if it is indeed Leicester B soils. The applicant did so at your recommendation. He went out and found the wetland soils where they are. The wetland map was amended to now include those wetlands.
So the applicant used the maps, which was what was first submitted. And then based on that, you all went and did samples that showed a more Lancaster. No.
No, the applicant, I'm not sure, I wasn't with their own consultant in terms of how they determined where the wetland line was. All I can tell you is this map was presented to John and I, the one on the other side, and looking at the wetland delineation and looking at the NRC maps, I determined that it was possible they didn't include the Leicester B soils as indicated on the town code based upon them showing up on the map. And so it was recommended to this board that have a soil scientist go out and have a look. I don't do the wetland delineations for the applicants, Jackie. I do the verifications for this board. So basically, the soil scientist went out and provided photographic evidence and a report and what have you, documenting what he found. That was found to be acceptable, and that was submitted to the board for your approval.
And what I remember from reading the town code a while ago, it basically lists these, and if these are found, that's the determination.
Well, what it means is that if those are found on a map, it's a possible determination. Again, these are not site-specific, so when you're doing aerial photography and remote sensing, you're looking at a huge geographic area and not at that specific site. And you're looking at land features and determining, where soils probably will be, and they're developing their maps accordingly. However, when you get to an individual site, that mapping is maybe not accurate, and that's why it's always required, if you see something like this where it's a discrepancy, to have a soil scientist familiar with hydric soils go out. They do soil borings with 20 inches with an auger, and they take a look at the soil characteristics, and they basically map out the soil in terms of whether it's wetlands or not.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Anybody else? All right, so I'm going to poke holes in these cups, and John's going to talk to you.
Well, Bruce is playing with dirt.
Soil. Nothing. You're good. You're done. You're done.
We're doing drainage?
Yeah, I'm just going to show you, but you're done. You don't have to come up yet.
Okay.
Thank you, though.
Okay. I'm going to take the opportunity to build upon what Mr. Barber has kind of laid as the foundation. And he spent a lot of time talking about soils, talking about wetlands, talking about characteristics, and it comes up, so what? Well, one of the things that comes before you on a regular basis is the construction of a single-family home on an existing lot. People want to build a house, they got a well, they got a septic, they got a driveway, they got the house. How does all this relate? Well, basically, your erosion and sediment control requirements, any disturbance of 5,000 square feet or more, any disturbance on steep slopes, which are defined as slopes equal to or greater than 15%, any disturbance within 100 foot of a wetland, and excavation or filling which exceeds a total of 100 cubic yards. And what has historically happened is the Putnam County Health Department plays a major role in this. Those of you that are on the calls with us, when these people call and they bought a half an acre lot in the middle of some Lake Carmel neighborhood, one of the first things that Bruce and I always tell them is you got to figure out whether you can get a well and septic to work, whether you can get Putnam County Health Department approval. Some of the other issues are, what constitutes Putnam County Health Department approval? How big is the septic system? Where is the septic system? So Bruce and I decided that we've heard this mystery beast, Putnam County Health Department, and the only person that really probably interfaces with them on a regular basis is Mr. Walters. And I would suggest, and I think he said it before the meeting, that even his relationship with them is not the best. They are kind of, and I think it's the same in most towns, they're kind of a bit of a mystery. So what my intent was tonight was to try to put a face a little bit on the Board of Health, but it's kind of a difficult thing to do because the Putnam County Health Department is a local agency that also has ties to the New York State Department of Health, also has ties to the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, and also has very strict ties with the New York City Department of Environmental Protection. So all these agencies are tied together. And interestingly enough, I have to make this kind of segue, is I've been working in designing septics and permitting water supply facilities and such for the better part of 40 years. And I have historically not worked in Putnam County. I have not worked in Putnam County because I have always found it to be one of the more difficult counties to work in because their guidelines have not always been the easiest to follow. They are so intertwined with DEP that it's a very cumbersome process. And so this was kind of like an education experience for me. And I will tell you right up front, I don't think I have all the answers. I have places that you can look. I know what my experience as an engineer tells me. I'm hoping Bill will chime in as necessary, and Bruce, who has a better relationship with them. In the packet that I provided to you, the Putnam County Health Department puts out a whole series of guidance documents. I didn't realize it, but they start with, and I've kind of given you the cover for each one of these. The first is subsurface sewage treatment and water supply facilities for single-family residences. Okay? The next is sewage treatment and water supply facilities for commercial and multifamily residential projects. Now, interestingly enough, and I'll get to that later, there's some segues that involve other people. They also have a very strict, and this flows from state health, procedures and policies for realty subdivisions. A realty subdivision is a grouping of lots that are less than 5 acres and more than 2 lots. So it's a very specific element under the law. I've also, there's a couple guidebooks that they send you to. One is the primary one, the one that Putnam County derives all their power from, is Appendix 75A, which is a New York State Department of Health standard, and it's the wastewater treatment standard for residential on-site systems. This applies throughout the state. The interesting thing is, any county has to follow this, but they can be more stringent. So Putnam County has elected in certain areas to be more stringent. New York State DEC also weighs in. They have a design standards for intermediate wastewater works. That tends to be your commercial projects and your larger multifamily projects. And there's an interesting, they call it the Red Book. It didn't show up red, but it's residential standards. So there's all these intertwined standards. When it comes to on-site wastewater treatment, some people refer to it, and you'll see it in a lot of documents, as an SSTS. That's a subsurface treatment system. You'll also see sometimes in my letters, which is a convention that's used in some of the other counties, which is an OWTS, which is an on-site treatment system, wastewater treatment system. But counties are allowed to regulate and supervise up to 1,000 gallons per day being discharged to ground. Once you get above 1,000 gallons, and if you noticed on the top of the commercial sheet, the commercial cover, there's a notation that says once you get above 1,000 gallons, you are then covered under the Speedy's General Permit Program for private, commercial, and institutional discharges to groundwater from 1,000 up to 10,000 per outfall, which means per system, if you will, or a total of combined systems on certain projects of less than 30,000. So there's a whole series of people you got to satisfy to get this to work. My intent this evening is to try to focus on the under 1,000 gallons. That's the ones that you usually see. The single-family home, the addition to a single-family home, the reconstruction of a single-family home. I'm sure Mr. Walters will tell you a lot of people are buying some of the older houses, knocking them down, preserving the foundation, and building on top of them. Again, it's regulated by, there is a role that the health department plays in that. The other thing I included in your packet, because I think it's very important that you understand, is if you are in the New York City watershed, which most of the town of Kent, but for certain areas is, all projects located within the watershed are also subject to New York City DEP watershed regulations. Here again, the distinction is between residential and commercial, and for the most part, under this delegation agreement, DEP has kind of given the smaller stuff to Putnam County and said, you can do it, but you got to do certain things in order to do it. And we'll reserve some of the other ones for us. And Bruce is always fond of saying to me is one of the reasons that you folks reach a point on some of these approvals and the projects disappear. Where are they going? Well, other than DOT and a few other ones, most of the time devoted to a lot of these projects falls on the wastewater treatment system approval process. If it's strictly Putnam County, which a lot of the single-family homes are, it goes kind of quickly. They don't disappear for as long. But if you take some of the bigger multifamily projects, take, for instance, our friends, the Holly property. They've been gone for a couple years now. And where are they? They are stuck at the health department. They are stuck at the health department and DEP because the system size, the system location, the soil parameters all dictate both agencies are going to be involved. And both agencies have a tendency to want to get their pound of flesh.
Is that because it's over? Is that
Because it's over 1,000,
It's over
Gallons.
1,000 gallons, and it's located in a floodplain, and it's all sorts of issues, so.
and when they do the condos, like Kent Manor or whatever, is it one area that they bring all of that to? The septic or whatever, over 1,000 gallons, or do they break that up?
Certain sites, they have central septic systems. Other sites have separated, that's why it's called an outfall. So they might send 10 units to an outfall over here and 10 units to an outfall over there. Or as you take Kent Manor, they built a wastewater treatment plant.
Okay.
And it's a
And
whole
that
other
covers
beast.
okay.
So, but I just wanted to give you,
Wastewater treatment like on the Carmel developments up on the ridge, all of those are wastewater, those are sewer systems. That's all DOH too?
Any sewer system, okay, is going to go through a couple different approvals, Putnam County Department of Health, and typically there might be New York State involved, depending upon the size, and the different bylaws are involved in the offering plan, and then also DEP, and sometimes even DEC. So there are multiple layers, and they have an entirely different permit strategy when you go over these large gallons where they're requiring a different permit called a SPEDIES permit, a State Pollution Discharge Elimination System permit, where it's actually creating parameters for operations and maintenance of the plant, monitoring the plant, testing the plant. All those things are built into a SPEDIES
Okay, so
plan.
those are really long horizons.
Yeah.
yeah, they can be, yes.
For,
If-
I mean, all of this.
they can take some time. Now, so having said all that, that's kind of the framework. Now, how do we get back to what Bruce was talking about, soils? Well, you're all familiar with all the projects that come in front of you for a single-family home need a new single-family home, need a septic system. So I'm going to spend some time talking about what constitutes an on-site wastewater treatment system, a septic system, if you will. And I brought an example. As you know, I'm fond of examples. Bruce is fond of examples that you have already looked at. And I chose one because the engineer happens to be fairly clear on what he does. So if you were to get up, and now's not the time, let me go through a few of the issues. But this is a septic system for a project you all may remember called Rapoli. And this has a single-family home, had a driveway, well, septic, and this case, it's a little different design, but one of the nice things about this set of drawings is all the elements required by Putnam County are shown here. So you can walk up and see what it consists of. And there are 3 sheets there, and I'll explain why there's 3 sheets. But it's a fairly good example, and I may refer to it from time to time, but it's a project you've all seen, you've approved, and moved on.
Now, if I may, too, this project had a town jurisdictional and DEP jurisdictional watercourse running right along the right edge of it, and that precluded the septic and expansion area from going in that area. That and the control area, 100-foot setback. Sorry.
No problem. That's why we're tag teaming this. So the first thing is, what's a design flow for a septic system? How do you figure it out? You know, and it's real easy. It's actually been figured out for you. And if you were to go to your packet, basically what ends up happening. Well, let me stop for a minute. Putnam County. What actually constitutes a septic system? So this is kind of a little sketch in there. It's in your packet. And it basically lays out, you've got a house, you've got a septic system, you've got a septic tank, then you've got the actual septic system itself. And there's 2 examples here. One is a fill system, one is a standard in-ground system. A fill system I'll get to explain later on, but simply put, there's not enough soil there to do what it needs to do, so you bring in fill and put the system in partially in the fill. But that kind of sets the parameters. That's what we're talking about. They all may look slightly different, but that's the general basics of what you're dealing with. So you go to the next table, and I stayed with houses. There are all sorts of tables which will give you design flows for various occupancies, so on and so forth. But these are numbers you typically have heard or seen. The standard design flow for a bedroom is 150 gallons per day. That was the older style fixtures. Over time, fixtures have changed. If you have a new house, you can only get 1.6 gallons for flush, so on and so forth. So the design flows change somewhat over time. Currently speaking, if you were a new house, modern fixtures, the design flow number is now down to 110 gallons per day per bedroom. And you have to look at some other things. For instance, in Putnam County, all SSTS systems are required to be designed to support a minimum of 3 bedrooms. So basically, that's your starting point. It's got to be 3 bedrooms. I know you have seen from time to time 2 bedrooms. That's a special case. I know from time to time, and this one particularly, this is a 5-bedroom. That again kind of jumps it into a little bit of a special case, but for the most part, the minimum design value is 3 bedrooms. If you add an extra kitchen, which sometimes occurs, that is like adding an additional bedroom. So you could have a 3-bedroom house and 2 kitchens. You'd need to add an extra flow, and Putnam County adds 150 gallons per day. I'm kind of thinking that probably means 110 gallons per day for that extra kitchen. But that all gives you the design flow. And the reason that design flow is important is that's what starts to begin to size your system. How much water has to be disposed of? So the next factor that we talked about was the septic tank. And the septic tank is basically, for lack of a better word, is a holding tank. And the modern septic tank is a two-compartment tank that basically allows solids to settle out. It allows floatables and scum to come to the top. And the water to be treated is kind of a middle ground. And the way it's designed is to keep the solids in the tank for the most part, to keep the floatables and other stuff in the tank, and really just allow water to pass through. And septic tanks have a requirement for a specific water depth. They have a requirement for specific sizing. And what I've given you is the capacities for the various sizes. So the new capacity for a septic tank for a 3-bedroom house is 1,000 gallons. That's the minimum size. We've had a couple projects in recent years where people have upgraded an older home. And one of the things you find, and Bill always sends them there, they have to go to Putnam County because older homes typically had a 500-gallon tank. And it was usually a metal. And so Putnam County wants them to get rid of those. So they have to go and get a repair permit to pull their tank and put it with a new one. I'm not sure everybody gets the permit, but they're supposed to. I mean, by Bill's chuckle, tells us that. But the size of the septic, most of them are precast concrete. Some of the people use polymer tanks. I don't think that's gained widespread application yet. Polymer tanks have other issues with them. They float too easily, so you got to put a concrete ballast on them. There's other things. More people are going to that because it's easier. From a constructing standpoint, you get a 1,000-gallon grease trap, you basically need a crane, and I don't mean a big crane, but the septic delivery firm will send one of their small cranes to drop it in the hole for you because of the weight. The unfortunate thing is, in Putnam County, you don't always have the luxury of getting that crane up close to the house. So one of the reasons that people are going with polymer tanks, 2 men can carry it. So it's one of those things. I know Dutchess County will accept them grudgingly, but kind of frowns on polymer tanks, but that's just Dutchess County, it's a different set of circumstance.
And then with bedrooms, counts and flows, if you add a garbage disposal, garbage grinder, that's a bedroom. If you have a hot tub, something like that, it's another bedroom. So, you know, as you change your house and what have you, you may be adding bedrooms and needing to increase the size of your system.
That's if,
But with the regular septics, should you even have a grinder? I mean,
Generally not recommended.
it's not
Right, I was gonna say, I didn't
recommended,
think-
but people do it.
okay,
And usually what you'll find is if you have a garbage disposal, your field life goes down. Because no matter how long you let it settle, you don't get all those particulates out, and they end up finding their way to the field and clogging the
cut
field.
up, okay.
So,
And the hot tub?
hot
Why is
tub-
that considered an additional, I mean, we don't have one, but,
It depends on whether the hot tubs, whether it's a complete recycling system.
right,
Or do they discharge their backwash
all
water?
the time type of thing?
Yeah,
Really?
it all depends on how they're set up.
Okay,
And same with swimming pools?
Swimming pools are a different beast altogether. They're not typically discharged to septic systems. So, okay, the next thing is, we're gonna start to jump into Bruce's territory of soils. In order to properly design a septic system, there are 2 very important tests that have to be run. And the purpose of these tests is to observe and classify the type soils and determine the soil's ability to accept and absorb wastewater. So the first test that is run is called a deep test. You need a backhoe, and you need to dig a series of test holes in the primary septic area and a reserve area. Putnam County has a requirement that all systems should have a 100% reserve area. So what that means is you have to identify an area where you can actually build a septic system and put it in, but you have to have an equally sized area where in the event there's a problem, you could establish another septic system that is 100% of the original. So deep tests, you need an excavator. Typical deep tests are run to a minimum depth of 7 foot, or until you hit rock or water. Now, what you need is a minimum of 5 foot of usable soil beneath the bottom of your absorption system. Okay, fancy words. Beneath your septic field. Your septic field is set at a 2-foot depth. You need 5 foot below that. That's where you get the 7 foot. And that is rock or an impervious surface. An impervious surface in an area like Kent can be clay. And dense clay sometimes is worse than rock. You need a minimum of 4 foot of unsaturated usable soil between, again, the bottom of your absorption trench and groundwater. So you need 6 foot. What happens if you don't have that? Well, in Putnam County, if you have a minimum of 3.5 foot of soil, they allow you to bring in fill to raise that profile to get the separation distances you require. okay? And the fill, they have very specific requirements, they have very specific types of fill, how long it has to sit, how long it has to be shaped.
Are you talking about like a mounded system?
Well, some of them are mounds, some of them are simple fill.
Okay. I remember years ago they were doing
Mound
mounded
systems are not typically seen here. You do have, most of them are standard fill systems because of Putnam County requirements and the interface with DEP. People don't like alternative systems, if you
Right,
will.
right.
So that's why it's kind of limited to fill.
I was thinking, years ago, it was in Lake Carmel, the other side of Lake Mosley, that they did mounding systems because they didn't have any place to go.
Right.
So they just
And,
mounded.
and, you know, sometimes because of the size of fill systems and the separations you require, you know, the additional size it creates, and when you do a fill system, you bring it up, and then you have to have certain offsets, and then you have to have a slope. Well, everything on a fill system is measured from that toe of slope, so everything got excessively large by the time you do it. And you'll see it on this to some degree.
And just a note on the, sorry, Joe, just a note on the reserve area. You'll see that a lot from John and I, where somebody's had a relatively moderate-sized parcel, they're putting an addition onto the house, they're putting patios, big driveways, and all of a sudden, the amount of area that's not pervious, okay? In other words, the area that they're adding to the property more and more is impervious surface, covering over with soil. You'll sometimes see John and say, please locate the expansion area for the septic system. Because if you're approving this whole litany of improvements, and all of a sudden, the septic system fails a year, 5 years, or 10 years later, where do they put it? Well, the only place they can put it is where the existing system is now, and that has a lot of issues because the soil is no longer going to be accepting of the wastewater the way it naturally would. In essence, you have to dig out an entirely new section, put a new soil in, new leaching areas and septic system tank. Tremendous expense.
So roughly, assuming the land is flat and you have 6 to 7 feet of soil to use, about what is the square footage of a septic field for a 1,000-gallon
Well,
system?
you're jumping ahead, because it's not
Wait,
that, it's
wait
not that.
my turn, okay.
It's not that, it's not a direct calculation.
It's not, okay.
So what ends up happening is you have to perform the next test, and that's a percolation test. Percolation test is basically a test which establishes the ability of the soil to absorb wastewater. And I'm going to simplify it real quickly. Basically, you dig a 12-inch diameter hole, about 24 inches to 30 inches in depth, and you follow a series of steps, and what you want to determine is the minutes per inch. How fast does the water go down? How fast the water goes down tells you the required length of your absorption trench. So you'll see in your packet, there's a table that basically tells you that's the length of your trench based on various perk rates. Now, couple things to note. In Putnam County, and particularly in DEP, a percolation rate of less than 1 minute per inch is unsuitable. You have to figure out a way to slow the water down, because it's not going to get what it needs to get in terms of treatment if it runs too fast. The other thing is, in Putnam County, what you will find is anything above 60 minutes per inch is also unsuitable. Basically, in a septic system designer's mind, greater than 60 inches, greater than 60 minutes means the soil doesn't perk at all. It's zero, it's effectively zero. So you can't use that. So if you've got nothing but clay or hard pan on the site, you got a hell of a job getting a septic system in.
So I want to, if you guys can go to John's handout, at the very bottom of the page is E-4. You're right there, I think, right?
That was the next page,
Yeah.
yes.
John's going to talk about, but you see the middle column on that, if everybody's looking at that, typical soil type. Remember a few minutes ago, we went through all these nifty names like fine sandy loam and sandy clay loam and what have you.
Next
That's
page.
what's in the middle there.
Next
And John-
page.
Yeah, John's talking about the percolation rate on the left-hand side. And you can see sand, total 100% sand is not suitable for septic system. Why do you think that is? Drains beautifully. All right, so I think you're going to cover that. Why?
And so I wanted to relate this directly to Bruce. That's why I put this chart in there, so that you could see how things correlate. So when you see, and Mr. Lynch has reproduced his deep test results on there, and he uses a lot of this language. And then you look at the perk test results, which are below that. And what you'll find is they tend to relate very specifically to what Bruce said. And if you think about what the intent of a septic system is, and we kind of take that for granted. Oh, it's to make the water go away. Well, yes, it is to make your wastewater go away, but it's also to provide treatment for your wastewater. There's kind of like filtration. There's aeration, there's dispersion, there's all sorts of things that occur in those soils below a septic system so that the water gets properly treated before it reaches groundwater.
And in addition to all that stuff as well, microorganisms play a tremendous role. So in the septic tank, there's no oxygen in there. So you have organisms called anaerobic bacteria that degrades some of the solid material that is entering the septic tank, but not in total, not 100% effectively, typically, and that's why the septic tank periodically needs to be inspected and pumped, because the layer of material will build up and unfortunately could go out into the leaching area. In the leaching area, there's air there. You have aerobic bacteria that are degrading the nutrients basically in the effluent, the discharge from the septic tank, and that's going hopefully through the microorganisms, the gravel, the soil, what have you, and eventually reaches a point where most, if not all, of the pathogens and nutrients and what have you are removed through that action. And that's basically what a leaching system does. Okay, buddy?
Nope, we're all on the same page. You'd almost think we practiced.
Yeah, yeah.
So now you've got your deep test done, you got your perk test done, you got your system size. A couple things we need to really go back and a couple things on the perk test. Putnam County will witness all the deep tests. They want to see what the deep tests reveal. Putnam County will also witness the perk test. That's part of their delegation agreement with DEP. We'll let you do this provided you witness the percolation test. So one of the reasons that some of these systems take time is to get everybody on the same page in terms of witnessing things. And the department witnesses basically a bunch of any lot within a New York City watershed, any lot of less than half an acre, any lot where most of the lot, as Bruce said, some of these lots, most of the lot is either septic or reserve area. They want to see the perk rates so that they understand what's going on. And then concerns about the soil. Oftentimes, engineers like myself will run a perk rate and will come up with a perk rate that doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense with the soils, it doesn't make sense with anything. But remember, you're digging a 12-inch round hole in the middle of an area. And Simon will tell you, in New York City, they do borings all the time. And the only thing that a guy doing a boring will tell you is exactly what's in that hole. And so as a consequence, when you're doing perk tests, the only thing you can conclusively come away with is what goes on in that hole. If you've seen it and it's too fast when all the other ones are okay, or it's too slow when all the other ones are okay, you make a judgment call. But what ends up happening is the slowest stabilized rate, so in other words, the slowest perk rate defines the system. That's what you have to do for design. It's to be conservative. But when you have these little variances, sometimes Putnam County wants to go back out and see for themselves as to what may have transpired. In case there's, oftentimes you'll dig a hole and, with a backhoe, and you'll see a specific lens of soil. You can tell it different color, different texture, different whatever. And if that lens happens to fall in the 24 to 30 inch range, and it's a little tighter soil, you can have a less than satisfactory perk rate. It'll slow down. So, but Putnam County, I imagine they stay busy. And Bill, I don't know if you can tell me, according to their guidelines, they only witness perks from July 15th to September 15th?
Well, one of the reasons behind, right, well, one of the reasons behind that could be, I'm not sure about that, is that during early times of the year, you have elevated groundwater conditions,
Yes.
which may impact the septic functioning. However, not to be lost, when there are drought conditions or dry conditions, and the deep test is done down to 7 feet, the person who's doing the witnessing should be experienced enough to look at the soil parameters and look for markers in that soil profile that shows where the groundwater level is, even in the dry conditions. That layer is called redoxymorphic features, or it used to be called soil modeling. Typically in this area, it's kind of an orange bathtub ring that you see, not solid, but kind of dimpled in the soil profile, and that will show you that during certain times there's not enough oxygen in the soil, and some of the nutrients in the soil are being oxidized and make into rust. Basically, the iron is being oxidized, make into rust. That's the orange color, and that's how people look. And even though it's dry as a bone, you look at that, and you should, if you're experienced, be able to say, nah, that's where the water levels are periodically. Okay.
So, I'm going to talk a little bit about a fill system. As I said, Putnam County allows you to supplement existing soils. And as long as you've got 3.5 foot of existing soil. So you could bring in 3 foot of another 3.5 foot and make the system work. Water's a little different. You have to be able in water to get a satisfactory percolation rate at 24 inches. So in other words, water, if it's too close to the surface and you can't get a 24-inch perk, you can't supplement it. So it really depends. And when you design your system, you also have to bring in this fill. Well, this fill has to be tested, has to have a perk rate in it. And the perk rate of the fill has to be the same, equal to, or less than the underlying fill. So the original soil. So you can't, because if you bring in nice sandy bank run gravel, the perk rate is going to be relatively quick, but you're designing your system for a bigger. So, and you can't have, so what a lot of guys will do will mix soils. It won't be pure bank run, it'll be basically a silty bank run. You'll see around here. Interestingly enough, fill systems, they have to be allowed to settle naturally for a period of at least 6 months and include 1 freeze thaw. So in other words, you could bring it in this month and put your septic in May of next year. 6 months have elapsed, went through 1 freeze thaw cycle, or you can bring it in and mechanically stabilize it. You can beat it up. You have to be careful as to how hard you compact it so you don't over compact it, but you can achieve their required stabilization by mechanical compaction. So that's why fill systems take some time. And
Want to take a short break?
sure, we can.
Everybody want to take a short break? 5 minutes or so?
We've been,
And there's nothing up the sleeve. in these cups here is exactly the same material, clay, soil, sand, all right? So I have taken the liberty of taking and putting whole, similar size in each cup. And I have this water, courtesy of Vera, to pour in here. And basically, what we're going to see is the characteristics of these three soils, because this has so much to relate to what John was just talking about with soils, percolation rates, how fast or how slow water goes through the soil. So which one would you like me to do first? Clay, sand, or the mixed bag soil? Clay it is.
No, but I was gonna say, I think, are we doing the fastest, the
You can,
slowest?
Sand-
you can,
sand.
you know,
Kathy
it
wants
might be,
sand.
it might be advisable that everybody comes up, because some of these might go quick and others might take.
Tell you what, it's going to drain out of the bottom. Hopefully, and this is live TV, so if it doesn't go well,
I think the sand's gonna go quick.
okay, everybody agree with Kathy? Can everybody see?
No, Kathy, that makes it better doing than the wind is there.
All right, here we go.
It's just like my husband. Oh, God.
All right,
Has that been certified?
that has been. Weights and measures.
I think you better
Okay,
poke
let's
your
see.
hole.
Let's see. Hold on a second. Hole might be a little.
Oh, there
you
it goes, there it goes.
Okay, so how long did that take?
15 seconds?
Maybe?
Probably about
10.
10 seconds.
Okay, now that is a filled cup, just like this one, of sand. So it took that amount of water to go through this whole cup of sand in maybe 10 seconds. Which means that this would be unsuitable for a septic system, as John alluded to, because nothing's holding the water back long enough to allow all that degradation of the contaminants, if you will, in the effluent, whether it's by dispersion or microbial by action or what have you. The water goes through too fast, will basically end up in the groundwater table, and guess what the groundwater table is tapped into? Wells, things like that. So we don't want this stuff to get down into that we'll call it aquifer, if you will, to cause problems. All right, let's do the clay. Same amount is in there. Here we go. You're going to be here a while, unless I didn't seal it properly. If you guys want to go out coffee, maybe have some breakfast, something like this. This is working, John. Okay. I would gather that we could be here till about 8:30 or 9, 15 minutes or more before anything comes out of here. Okay? That's true. So my question to you really is, why does it take so long for the water to go through the clay? Tiny, tiny particles that have electrostatic charges to them, and they attach to one another, and they create a very strong bond in the clay particles, so there's no openings that the water can flow through. And you think of sand, these big grains of sand, and there's all these openings, they touch each other, and there are all these openings for the water to flow through, and that's why these soil characteristics have different properties based upon how much sand, how much clay is in it. Now this guy was from a construction site in Yorktown, and I sure do hope it was tested. Let's see what this does. I really don't know, honestly. This might take an intermediate amount of time.
Oh, right away. That's
There you go.
Oh, but it's dripping.
No, that's from the hole. So what you have in this soil is a lot of sand, but not all sand. It's not coming out as quickly or as much. This is empty now. This is going to take a while. So it's the mixture of sand, silt, and clay that dictates this water dropping, and this is basically a very rough approximation of what John was talking about with the percolation test. Somebody's going to dig a round hole 20 inches deep, they're going to pour water, they're going to saturate it, pour water in it, and they're going to measure the drop, how fast it occurs, and that's going to help you design your leaching system or your laterals. Okay?
And basically, when you're doing a perk test, your rate has to stabilize. In other words, you have to get the same rate 2 times in a row. And you also have to run multiple times. So what ends up happening is the soils kind of tighten up, if you will, over time. There's standards you have to follow. You have to put gravel in the bottom of the hole. You have to, we won't get into that. But to Bruce's point, what you saw there was, a very classic example. You know, you get a tight clay hole, you could be here all day. Makes your life miserable. And then we were talking about fill systems. We're just about finished, but when it comes to a fill system, the other thing that Putnam County is a little bit unusual is they make you put the fill for the expansion area in at the same time as the other fill. And what that has a tendency to do, believe it or not, is increase your area of land disturbance. Because remember, everything is based on the bottom of the fill, where it hits the ground by the time it's all done. So it's a rather large, it can be a rather large footprint. And that all gets back to what you folks do. Now, I was going to jump to a couple issues in terms of plan requirements, but I want to go to water and then I'll get back to the plan requirements because they all kind of dovetail a little bit better together. Now, there is very limited public water supplies here in town, if any. There are three. Most of the areas that you deal with are supplied by wells. Putnam County permits only drilled wells. So some of the old well points, some of the old driven wells, really can't use. They only allow one potable well for each single-family dwelling unit.
But in Lake Carmel, there's houses, we had two on one well thing, there's one on the other road. A lot of houses had the well service to, what is it? Community. Not community, because. The what? That's what they're called?
They may have allowed them in the old days, they're not allowed anymore.
They must have.
And when you start to do stuff like that, it creates real complications because there are requirements. How do you, if you live in house A and your well is in the back of house B, and the people aren't living in house B right now, and so they're not using any water and the well craps out. What do you do? There's no easements, there's no other things. It becomes very complicated. So that's why people got away from that. I mean, technically speaking, you start to get into community water systems, you start to get into the legal aspect of transportation corporations. You need, there's all sorts of things when you start to have one well serve multiple properties. It's not recommended, and as a consequence, only one nowadays is permitted. And it's not to say, but if somebody were to come in and rebuild one of those houses, I would venture to say that Putnam County would probably make them drill their own well. I don't know, but I would suspect. And so one of the greatest issues when it comes to, now you got a lot, you know where you're putting your septic, you figured out the size of your septic, you know you're gonna do a drilled well. How does all this stuff fit together and make the lot workable? And the thing that really drives everything is separation distances. And there's a whole series of guidance with respect to separation distances. Putnam County has kind of adopted a little flexible policy, more flexible than some of the other counties when it comes to the separation distance between wells and septic. If a well is uphill of a septic, it has to be a minimum of 100 feet. If a well is downhill of a septic, in most communities, it has to be 200 feet. Putnam County, in recognition of their interesting soils, contours, and other things, have come up with a little more sophisticated way, which is called the direct line of drainage. So it gives you a little flexibility in terms of getting a well and a septic on some of these older style, smaller lots. But remember, it's not just the separation from what's on the subject lot. You have to take into account the neighboring lots. And what we find, this last year, Kathy, because of the tax sales, you know, there were people on every week saying, hey, I bought this lot and it's here and it meets the minimum zoning, can I put a house on it? And the answer was, you gotta go see what works. Because even if you could get the lot itself to work, you might not be able to get the separation distance from the septic that's on the lot next door. Or your septic might be too close to the well that's on it. So it's very important. But there are all sorts of separation guidelines that come into play. And I gave you a bunch of the guidelines, but Putnam County has adopted some that are more stringent than most other places. And it's really, when you start to put these on some of your lots, doesn't leave you a lot of room. For instance, a minimum distance of 20 feet from a septic tank to an in-ground swimming pool. How many people, their septic is in the backyard, they want to put a pool right next to it? Technically, you're not supposed to. You need to demonstrate to Mr. Walters that you can do it. And, you know, involves buildings, footing drains, other things. So you get a well to work, you get a septic to work, but there's a whole bunch of other things you have to check. And that's why I gave you 3 various guidelines. And the last one is Putnam County's, because Putnam County's is actually fairly stringent. And I think they did that for a reason, because a lot of their land is questionable. So now I'm going to jump back to some plan requirements, because it kind of embodies, this set of plans kind of embodies what we've been talking about.
Microphone, John.
Oop, I'll take this. All right. Okay, this is a set of plans. This is Rapoli. This is Smalley's Corners Road, if you may recall. They have a rather steep driveway that was tight to one property line. They have a rather large house. It's a 5-bedroom house. And interestingly enough, the last page, I think, in your packet may show you, the engineer had to, no, it doesn't. I have it. The engineer had to submit house plans, and they had to be certified by Putnam County to establish the 5-bedroom. And their approval basically says, if you do anything else and change this, you got to come back and see us. So that's, again, an unusual one. But what they have here is they have a septic system right here. This is a little different. It's not a standard in-ground septic system. It's a bed system. And all that means is they create a bed, they brought in fill, they have all their pipes manifolded together, and it's sized accordingly, and they have to pump to it. So it acts the same way as a conventional septic system, but it's a bed. You think about it.
That's like a sewage injector?
Yeah, they have a small pump station, and they pump.
But this is a brand new house?
This is a brand new house.
I thought that the health department wasn't allowing, other than their standard.
The only alternate system that they allow is this. And again, it's a special dispensation. But, so what they have is they have the house, they have the septic, and in this case, the well is way down here in the corner to get the necessary separation distances from everything. And you can see in the background here, Paul has done the direct line of drainage calculation. You can see the keyhole. So you can see the septic system isn't quite 200 feet uphill, but it's not in a direct line of drainage, so it works. So now, one of the things, if you get a chance, here's all the design notes. And it's kind of interesting. The first one is the basis of design. 5-bedroom house, what the design flow is, and what the stabilized percolation rate he used in the design. Then here's a series of deep hole tests. and each of the deep hole tests correspond to a hole on the map. You have to show them there. Then there's a series of percolation tests, and again, they correlate to a location here on the plan, and you can see they all fall within the septic system, the reserve area, et cetera. Tells you it's a bed system, tells you what the beds consist of, and then, interestingly enough, most of these require an estimation of the fill. So oftentimes this kind of gets lost. We all look at the limits of disturbance, which in this case we're almost at 1.5 acres. But when you look at the fill requirements, what you very quickly find is that 100 cubic yards in your code, they blow through it real easy. Because for here, the gravel fill for the beds is 600 cubic yards. The clean fill is approximately 1,250 yards. So this is why oftentimes on your steep slope and erosion control permit, you need to have this stuff documented up front, because you can very quickly blow through that 100 cubic yards. And, you know, it's very important. And as Bruce said, there is a DEP intermediate water course, requires a 100-foot separation distance. And that's shown on here. Now the next. This is a detail. This describes the bed system, Kathy. And basically, this is your site plan, and your enlarged site plan shows the areas of the fill, shows dimensions on everything, and gives you the details that you require. And then this last one is an enlarged fill plan. When you're dealing with Putnam County, they require two plans. They require a fill plan. If you're filling greater than 2 feet, they require a design plan, which all this is, and then they require a fill plan, which it leaves off some of the information where they can easily see what the fill is. They also have to have a profile through the system so somebody can understand what's going on, how the fill is supposed to go. And then, as we talked, here's the typical fill section detail. You've got your trench, you've got a 3-foot separation, a 5-foot separation, a 2-foot, and then your slope, and everything is measured from the toe of slope. So if you get a chance, this is a good set of drawings to look at. And Putnam County is pretty interesting. They require you to file a plan basically showing where you're going to dig your deep tests before they will even go out there and schedule them. And then once you do them, then they require a whole series of plans like this. You get away with one less if you're under 2 foot of fill. But interestingly enough, if you read the requirements of the Putnam County Health Department and you compare them to the requirements for your steep slope and erosion control permit, what you very quickly find is you're both asking for the same information. And anybody who complains is kind of wrong, if you will, because if you were a pretty smart engineer and you needed to satisfy both the town and the county, all you'd have to do is basically follow the county guidelines, because they're the ones with the biggest approval, and you folks get what you need. I often find when people complain, I find it somewhat puzzling. Oh, you folks are asking for too much. No, they're asking for the same thing. And it's very important that, you know, people understand that. And what you'll find is I brought The way Paul did this is he took this information and put it on your erosion and sediment control plans. So what got submitted to you is actually 3 different plans, not these. You required these for the record. These are in the record, but what you grant your erosion and sediment control permit on, slightly different, but it has all the same basic information. It doesn't go into the detail that this does. It doesn't have all but it has the basics of the footprint and everything that you need to review. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is there's a tremendous overlap, and it's not you folks. And you can advance these pretty far, and then it disappears in the health department, and I don't know how long it takes, but it takes what it takes, and that's why, again, as I started saying, a lot of people don't rush back to you. They're out there because they're still trying to satisfy things. There's a couple other real regulatory matters that we need to talk about. And these primarily, the commercial one, you don't have too many commercial projects here. You don't have too many multifamily projects here in town. And the ones that you do have basically are connected to sewer or want to be connected to sewer, had the capacity exist. But, so I'm not gonna spend a lot of time with commercial, but if you were to do a commercial that required a septic and a well, it's all the same. It's not much different, as long as you stay under 1,000 gallons. You jump above 1,000 gallons, there's other hoops you have to go through. The other involvement, again, it's not you, it's DEP. DEP takes a more active role in commercial. So for instance, I think we had folks come, I think it was O'Reilly Auto Parts. They want to go, they're going to need a health department approval. I think they're not close enough to connect to sewer. So they're going to need to so that's going to trigger some things. There's a lot of wetlands. So that's going to be one of those processes that one of the reasons they may not have come back to you is they might be doing all that work up front. And then to be in a position to actually then deal with you folks. So, just keep that in mind. And then after the approvals, there's a whole series of steps that and after approvals, I mean, once we get our erosion sediment control permit squared away, and if you all recall, we typically ask for demonstration of Putnam County Health Department approval. Usually we get a health department approval sheet. There's a copy in there that says, yeah, we approved this. And then it all falls on pretty much that gentleman, because then they can get they can file for a building permit. There's all sorts of steps that they have to follow with the health department that we don't get involved in. And I was kind of interested, and Bruce kind of corrected me and disabused me of a myth that I didn't know
As
existed.
often happens.
But Putnam County requires a licensed contractor as an installer of a septic system. It's one of the few places that does, up north, you don't need to be licensed. And basically, when they're all done, the engineer has to issue a certificate of construction compliance. Can't issue it, I didn't realize, and Bill will probably chime, unless they have a 911 address.
Yes. They need a 911 to close out.
Yep. There's a guarantee that, and I gave you copies of it, that the installer and the owner have to sign. It basically says, hey, we put the system in and we're gonna kind of warranty it for 2 years. I don't know if you get that, Bill, or not.
Once in a while, on new construction, I'll get a paper from signed off that it meets all the
Okay.
requirements. There's one thing I'm looking for.
Okay. They're gonna need a demonstration of a minimum well yield of 5 gallons per minute. So when they drill the well, they have to test it for 6 hours. They have to get a minimum of 5 gallons a minute. If they don't get 5 gallons a minute, there's a whole series of steps that they have to go through. And again, it's not something we get involved with. I imagine Bill sees a lot of it.
I see the paperwork, that's all I see.
Yep.
Other than that, it's a board of health approved.
Yep, and a couple of the things that they get involved with, is they actually have to have a water test results. And it's more than satisfactory sanitary quality. There's other factors that they test that they have to pass. And they may actually have to, if it's less than 5 gallons, depending on how much less, they may have to do a 24-hour test. And if they can't meet the 24-hour test and it can only do, what it can do, then they have to do the engineer has to do a special analysis for how many gallons of storage exist within the well or within the town pressure tank. And again, I don't think Bill sees it, but this is all going on behind the scenes. And then the last thing is, and I kind of laughed at this when I read it, because every time we ask somebody for one, they say, it doesn't exist. And that's an as-built. Well, guess what? According to the Putnam's guidelines, they need an as-built that basically has to show the elements of their approval on a piece of paper. We very seldom get that. Interestingly enough, the only one I've seen was by one of our favorites, Mr. Jack Corral, who basically, he did a couple, and he did submit an as-built with each one, which doesn't address what we need all the time. But everybody says, nobody wants an as-built. Not true. An as-built is a requirement of the health department.
As-built for the septic and the well, or for the whole thing?
Basically, enough on that to demonstrate compliance with their approval. So in other words, you got a septic, a well, you need the separation from your house, you need the separation from this, you need the separation from that, you got stormwater management facility. So technically speaking, everything that would be on a full as-built should be submitted to the health department. And again, I'm going to classify that saying this is my interpretation and my reading of your guidelines. How Putnam County actually does it, I do not know, because it never seems to reach us. Is that true?
Oh, very much.
Okay, and I think that covers it. I did give you a bunch of the paperwork that Mr. Walters sees from time to time, just so you have it. I also gave you, I think there is in there a couple, just extra sheets of like a septic tank, what a typical septic tank would look like, some other things, but that kind of gives you an idea and puts it in context for a project you've seen.
I have one question, and I believe the answer is no, we do not allow these anymore, for dry wells, which are very common around this area.
They're in the code and in Putnam County's guidelines, and there's separation distances for them, and there are certain circumstances under which they will approve them, but their separation distances are much greater than most. The construction exercise is a lot more difficult because you have to do your perk test at half the depth. So if you were putting an 8-foot dry well in, which they used to be 8x8s, if you were to put that in today, you need to do your perk test down at 4 foot. I'm not getting in the hole anymore, but, so in limited situations, my understanding of the way this is written is the health department will entertain them, but you gotta get a special approval.
The short answer is no.
Right. I haven't seen one in years.
I haven't seen them in years because
Years and
nobody wants to
years.
jump through those
Yeah.
hoops, but,
Yeah. All right, in the short amount of time we have left, one of the questions that y'all had was what happens when the project leaves here, right? So what we're going to do in hopefully a relatively short period of time, we're going to start at the very beginning and we're going to walk through a project. It could be virtually any project. Project actually starts in Town Hall with somebody either giving Vera a call or an email, or Mr. Walters, them dropping by his office with something they have in mind they want to do. And if it's a project that seems to be warranted possibly for planning board review, they're referred to the monthly Zoom meeting of the planning board consultants. And basically, that is consisting of Mr. Andrews, myself, Mr. Walters, and usually at least 2 planning board members. What that is, it's a initial, first time, no cost for somebody to come and meet with all of us in one spot on Zoom and ask questions about the process. We do not design, we're not planning board members to approve anything, but we help them try to understand the process of application, what's required for complete application, things of that nature. Talk to them a lot about health department approvals, things of that nature. We have had innumerable compliments of how this facilitates process compared to some other towns that don't do this. It's just kind of one-stop initial shopping where you have the engineer, the building inspector, the planner, wetland guy, town board members, all in one spot to talk to you at the very beginning. So the next stop is they say, all right, we're going to submit an application. They do so to Vera along with the associate backup documents, and that application goes to the planning board and to John and I. And the initial aspect is that we will provide you with review memos based upon how this application complies with town code requirements, looking at other requirements regarding health department potential, DEP, DEC potential, wetlands, things like that. And you've all seen these comment memos virtually every single application. Now, in some of the minor projects, you review the comment memos and you make a determination, usually on one of our recommendations, that this is a very small project, and you decide, well, we either does not warrant a public hearing, and we'll go to what's called this administrative track, or it does warrant a public hearing, and after the public hearing, it'll still go to the administrative track. What the administrative track is that the planning board has completed the review, and they are now asking the applicant to fulfill the comment memos that both John and I have developed, and when those are fulfilled, then the project is deemed complete. It's completed, okay? The other aspect is when it's a larger project and it's not an administrative track and it goes through a review process. So in your packet, 4 or 5 pages down, is this draft 3 at the very top. And this is a planning board resolution for an actual project recently approved by the planning board called the Maracho subdivision, 2-lot minor subdivision. And basically what this resolution is, it's the codification, if you will, of all of your work in terms of review. Seeker processes, what type of seeker determination was made? Was there an erosion sediment control permit? Was there a wetland permit? How did you create what's called a negative declaration where there's no environmental impacts that are associated with the project? And then you get through to page, let's see what we got. The top, very top of page 4 of that document, the page number's in the lower center portion of the page. And these are conditions of approval, meaning that the planning board has approved this project subject to meeting and fulfilling these requirements. And we'll go over a few of them here. Planning board professional engineer comment memo, the comments are remaining. Really no different than an administrative track, right? Same thing, my memo, all right? Final review of the stormwater pollution prevention plan in steep slopes. Putnam County Department Health approval is required. Any approvals from DEC, DEP, posting of bonds. Okay, we're going to get to that in just a second as well. Oftentimes a performance bond, an erosion bond, long-term stormwater management maintenance agreement, inspection fees, recreation fee in the case of a subdivision, etc. So all of these conditions basically are the planning board's done with their review, but the applicant must now fulfill these conditions and bring them back to the town and verify with Vera that these documents from the health department obtained, et cetera, until they have basically completed these conditions. The more complete applications that we see and that you see, the fewer conditions are in this final resolution. In other words, the ones that have already answered most of these questions, have already provided us with all this information, have very, very few conditions of approval. The ones that basically are going to be doing on the back end, basically, then they have a relatively long list of conditions. Okay, so as part of your review, we're going to talk about bonds. Bonds basically are in a couple of different varieties, and John deals with them much more than I, so please weigh in. But there's an erosion sediment control bond, basically that the erosion controls will stay in place and do their job during the construction, and if they don't, the town has recourse to utilize the bond money to fix that. Okay? There's a stormwater management facility bond, basically long-term, indicating that these structures, these kind of holes in the ground that fill it with stormwater, they require periodic inspection and maintenance, and there's a bond agreement for that. As part of the erosion sediment control bond, there's also a landscape bond. People are putting in a lot of landscaping, want to make sure they're going to live for a certain amount of time, and the same thing with wetland mitigation plantings. So all of these bonds are estimated, and then John typically suggests to you to whether you want to accept these bonds. If you accept these bonds, then another track is that Vera will take them and take those bonds once they're reviewed by the town attorney, planning board attorney, and send them to the town board for acceptance. So that's another route that these take. The other thing, not to be remiss, is that if the planning board determines that through their review that zoning variances are required, either area variances typically for setbacks, front yard setback, too much area coverage, et cetera, then the planning board will typically halt their review and then send the applicant to the zoning board of appeals. Zoning board will then perhaps grant those variances, and it will come back to this board for continued review. Another loop involved, okay? So as we
I'm
move...
just gonna jump
Go
back
ahead,
for
man.
bonds for a little bit.
Yeah, thanks.
They all kind of vary from time to time, and some of the smaller bonds, you'll get a cash surety, they'll give you a check, they'll deposit it. Some of the larger projects, some of the bigger bonds, they will give you basically a surety bond. So there's different wording, different format, but for the most part, I think Vera, myself, and Sarah have kind of started to settle down on a standard form so that that we can move them ahead a little quicker. For instance, I don't know if any of you folks were aware, but Morrow is nearing, they think they're nearing approvals. So they sent us a nice email and said, hey, can you start our bonds? Because so that's in process. But, and to Bruce's point, one of the things is that when it comes to the stormwater management facilities, the first thing is they have to be built in accordance with what's approved. And after they built and are demonstrated to function, we convert that bond into a long-term maintenance bond because they have a further obligation to maintain them in the long run. And we had kind of gotten away from that for a little bit, but we're back to requiring that. So usually it's a percentage of the original bond. Sometimes it's 20%. Sometimes it's a little bit more, depends on the degree of difficulty of the stormwater management facilities and what kind of maintenance they require. But we're trying to cover as many bases as we can up front to make sure people do what they say they're going to do.
So there's an example, a little bit further in your packet, a performance bond for erosion sediment control. It's an actual bond document for the Azana property on Rescue. And this is just a small project. The bond was $6,000 for erosion sediment control. And basically that's to maintain the erosion control structures, but also to provide adequate funds for inspections. And we're going to talk about inspections in just a section. Okay, so you have an erosion sediment control bond estimate. This document, I don't believe you see this. This document, you've approved the bond amount. Vera, John, and Sarah, typically with little input, not much from me, craft these, and then these go to the town board for approval, okay? So that's what happens one case or one instance when it leaves your purview. In addition to that, there's the next section is a stormwater management facilities inspection and maintenance agreement, which John just talked about. This has to do with the inspection and long-term maintenance to ensure the adequate performance of the stormwater facility that's installed, because that basically is designed to reduce both the amount of water coming off the site and the amount of pollutants coming off the site, that there's no increase from pre-construction levels. So that needs to be maintained, just like anything else. Well, depends upon the size of the bonds. Depends. It's usually sureties or insurance companies that do the bonds. Yeah.
But in terms of these maintenance agreements, there's a companion document that goes with that, which is a maintenance easement. Because under the state DEC construction stormwater management guidelines, the owners have to maintain these things. If they don't, the responsible party is the town. So the town has to step up and do it. So, and that's why we have a maintenance agreement, which allows us to do that. But there's also an easement, which says, yeah, if you need to do it, you can come on my property and take care of it. So there's two documents that get filed in addition to the bonding documents.
And this goes for houses and commercial projects.
Sure.
Houses less so. It's basically the bigger commercial projects.
And how about when they're in the wetlands, that they were told not to do the wetlands?
You know, if-
I'm not sure.
If Bruce has said, you know, this is wetlands and they had to mitigate it or they had to do it and they didn't take care of it, and they're, a year later, they're in the wetlands, then what?
Well, two questions there, really, I think, Kathy. Just to get back before I answer that to the stormwater basins, as part of my responsibilities with the town, I have to inspect those basins, all of them in the town, twice a year. As a matter of fact, I just finished with Frank over in Lake Carmel doing all the basins. I think there's 8 or 9 of them around Lake Carmel, Putnam Concrete, over here at Old Town Hall, Ryan Park. There's quite a few of them. And basically, it's a standardized form that we use, and it drives the maintenance of those particular structures. Kathy, to answer your question, the vegetation plantings as mitigation are typically part of the erosion bond or landscape bond. We typically require a guarantee for a minimum of 3 years of the growing season with 80% survival at the end of the growing period, 3 years, from the date of completion or certificate of occupancy. Typically, there is a report and inspection required every year. Every year, if there's invasive species coming in, they're supposed to be removed. And the species at the end are certified that there's 80% survival. If not, then part of the bond can be utilized to augment the plantings that are dead, diseased, or missing. Okay, if they intrude into the wetlands, then that's a different story. If they don't have a wetland permit to do that, well, then that's something Mr. Walters and typically the two of us will deal with on a different level, and it'll come to you eventually as some type of violation.
Inspections?
Who does the inspections?
Like for the 3 years, who goes and checks?
Typically, the applicants, like landscape architect or engineer, will do the inspections. The first inspection and the final inspection are done by the 3 of us. Make sure it's done properly, initially and finished.
Okay, so the 3 years are coming, so first year, they inspect it and they send you a report?
Right. What we do is we do a pre-construction meeting, we'll get to this in a second, pre-construction meeting. When they install the plantings, there's a requirement in the resolution or my memos that says the certification must be provided that they have installed the plantings in accordance with the approved plans. It also says planting substitutes may not be made without prior approval, written approval. So they have to put the plants in as they said they will, and they provide written certification of doing so. As part of our inspections, we're going to periodically look at there because now we have a whole litany of inspections we need to do on a monthly basis, including the wetland mitigation. So we're going to be responsible for inspecting them more frequently now that the new DEC regulations came out in January of last year. Okay, so other things that Simon.
Just a quick question before we go. John, you said about with the bond that there was an easement for allow somebody else to come in and take care. That's only a temporary easement, right, until the bond is done?
Oh, no. There, it's a
Permanent?
It's a permanent easement. And the only person that's allowed in there is the town or its authorized agent. So, and it's because of our obligations under the MS4 provisions of the stormwater permit process.
All right, so let's say that the planning board has finished their review. The applicant has completed the conditions of approval or fulfilled the comment memos that John and I had in the administrative tracks. The bonds have been adopted and accepted by the town board. At that time, we'll be asked to write a notification of complete application, which then provides a signal for the chairperson and John to sign the plans. Once the plans are then signed, there's more stuff that happens. The plans then go to Mr. Walters, typically to obtain a building permit. When a building permit is obtained, one of the first things that we do in coordination with Bill's office is we go out and do a pre-construction meeting. That means that before they really put a shovel in the ground, but after they install all the approved erosion and sediment controls that are on the plans, we go out and inspect the properties to make sure those erosion controls are installed properly. One of the first things we do is make sure that the applicants and often the contractors have a signed, sealed, current set of plans. I will tell you more than 25% of the time, they do not. They're working with different plans, they're not signed plans, so they're required to get a signed and sealed set of plans, so we're all working from the same set of plans. We exchange contact information for any questions that come up, and we make sure that they have their MS4 permits, if applicable, in order. Following that, using an example here which says Insight on it, the next one, this is a typical inspection report for, I believe it's for our friends at Flintlock Ridge. we're getting these weekly inspections where a person who represents Inside Engineer, who's a certified inspector, goes out and checks the erosion controls to ensure that they are compliant with the permit, the approvals, and are in good working condition. And the document here attests to that. We are now required, as a municipality, to go out every 30 days and do the same exact thing. So we have a myriad of inspections going on after you've approved it, but hopefully to ensure it's being constructed properly with the proper erosion sediment controls, that there's an understanding between all of the parties, contractors, engineers, building inspectors, and what have you, that we're all on the same page, making sure the project goes along in accordance with the plans that you have approved. After that, we, of course, have periodic inspection reports. At the completion of the project, John and I and Bill will go out, once the applicant has indicated they're done, and we'll be looking for the plans, the work that's installed in accordance with the plans. We're also looking at, from the erosion sediment control perspective, a minimum of 80% permanent vegetative cover on the site, meaning there has to be grass growing at least, a certain length. And the town code says that that must be over a 2-year period. Oftentimes, though, you'll hear John and I recommend that we checked it in the fall. It had more than 80% grass growth on it. It's been through a winter now. We go out in the spring. It's not been 2 years, but it's through a winter cycle. The grass is still growing well, and we'll recommend that the bond could be released at that time. Oftentimes, the board will consider that. Other times is that most of the site has been completed, but not all of it. But on occasion, you'll hear for a request for reduction in the erosion sediment control bond, simply because they've stabilized some of the site, but not all of it. But the bond was for the entire site. So the applicant is looking for some, but not all of their money back, and that's usually a recommendation of the amount that comes from John. So after that, if you agree that the bond can be released, you make a recommendation to the town board. The town board will then consider it, and if they agree, then the notification will be sent to the finance director to release the bond in place. But we're not done. After that, as I said, periodic inspections of now the grass is all growing, the erosion controls have been removed, Bill has issued his certificate of occupancy and completeness, but the stormwater basins that are there are still going to be inspected on an annual basis, twice a year by me, once a year by the applicant, in accordance with the maintenance agreement that was reviewed by this board and accepted by the town board. Okay, so the stormwater structures that basically are imperative to work properly to ensure that pollutants and water amounts don't leave the site compared to pre-construction levels are inspected. And if required, there's maintenance requirements that need to be done, and follow-up inspections are done to make sure the maintenance has been completed properly. Septic systems that have been installed and in place, we have a code chapter, Mr. Walter's office administers it, that a septic tank must be inspected every 5 years and certified in writing by a licensed septic inspector or installer. I think they just installer or inspector, in which there's a report in 3 parts still, Bill, copy to the property owner, copy to you, copy to the health department. Bill's office has the unenviable task of enforcement. So there's an entire code written at the end. When Bill's database does not show the 5-year inspection, he has sent out written notifications to comply. So the septic systems are just not left in the ground to forget. The other thing that happens periodically, but on a very irregular basis, is something called illicit discharge and detection inspections, where a highway department person will lift up a catch basin and he'll see a plastic pipe coming into the back of it that's foamy water coming out of that pipe. Or it'll have a distinct separate odor to that pipe. Basically what happens is people or contractors will install drainage, laundry machines, septic system overflows into the storm sewer system, or for that matter, into wetland streams or lakes as well. And those are illicit discharge. We have a separate chapter in our town code on illicit discharges and how they have to be addressed through Bill's office and enforcement, through cooperation with Bill and myself to do testing of the outflows of those materials to ensure that any of those illicit discharges are addressed and not polluting our systems, okay? So that's basically what happens when it leaves y'all. You have a massive amount of information you assimilate and review as part of your reviews. When the project leaves you, the applicant still has certain things they have to comply with before they finish up approvals and getting signatures from Simon and from John. From there, there's the building inspections, a building inspector's permit, and then there's inspections and follow-up inspections and compliance issues as well. So I hope that helps you understand that you do a tremendous work, but it's not just complete and done when you're done. There's other things that happen to ensure your work is carried out. Okay, any questions?
Yes, but we're over.
I know.
Save my questions for next time.
So, just to piggyback on what Bruce said, in case you're interested, the chapter, it's chapter 60, sewage disposal systems, separate is what the chapter is, and that's where the inspection provisions come out.
If everybody wants to stay for 30 seconds, go ahead, Jackie. You don't want to stay for 30
No, because
seconds?
it's gonna be one of those questions, it's gonna be,
Oh, it's a multi-part? It can't be a multi-part.
It's gonna be what I affectionately call a Columbo question.
Oh.
You know, it's one of those questions
yeah,
where you
no.
ask a question, then it leads to another question, leads to another question.
Hey, I've always wanted to say that Simon gets this motion to close.
Thank you.